On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we present the organizational depth chart at the goalie position for the Minnesota Wild, who's going to play where this season, and I'll tell you one name you definitely should keep an eye on.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. With the playoffs in the rearview mirror, the sports have stopped sporting the way we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we unveil our long-awaited organizational depth chart at the goalie position for the Minnesota Wild. We'll talk about the players in the system, a name that I think you're going to definitely want to keep an eye on this year, and a little assist from The Athletic, who just released their NHL goalie combo rankings for the upcoming season. So we'll discuss that as well. I'll give you a hint on a list that goes from worst to best. We got to the Minnesota Wild pretty quickly, so we'll talk about that here on today's show. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and there's been a lot of change in the organizational goalie department for the Minnesota Wild over the offseason. Seen a couple of longtime holdovers that are no longer part of the equation, and the team has made some really conscious decisions to try to help that group out this upcoming season. And so, all told, you've got the guys at the top. You've got Filip Gustavsson, you've got Marc-Andre Fleury, you've got Jesper Wallstedt. So we're going to talk about those guys at the end of the show. What I wanted to do is talk about everybody else, because depending on how things play out with injury, it is pretty much a lock that Filip Gustavsson, Marc-Andre Fleury, and Jesper Wallstedt will take all of the NHL starts this year, whether that be Fleury and Jesper, whether that be Gus and Fleury, whether that be Jesper and Gus. It feels pretty likely that those three are going to take a majority of the starts for this upcoming season. But as we saw last year, in the games that Jesper started for Iowa, the games that they won were the games in which he was in the net. When he wasn't, good luck. And so the Wild made a bunch of moves to address the goalie situation and to try to add a little depth to be able to handle injury and inconsistency this upcoming season. So we're going to start from the top, from the guy who was brought in that's really turned some heads in the World Championships, and that is Samuel Hlavaj, who was signed to an entry-level contract, 2 years, $1.75 million in total. And for Hlavaj, he will then be a restricted free agent in his age 25 season in 2026. If you look at Hlava's played a ton of hockey since really breaking in with the Slovakia U18 team in 2015-2016. He has played all the way up to Team Slovakia in the World Junior Championships when he was 18, when he was 20, all the way to the World Championships over the last couple of seasons, including this past year with Slovakia, going 3-2 with a 9.25 goals against average and a 925 save percentage and a 2.54 goals against average. The Wild signed him to the organization. I thought he looks really good in the World Championships, and so really excited to see what he brings to the table at 6'4", just 23 years of age. And as we saw in Wild Development Camp, he's got a little bit of a personality to him, which I think makes it that much more fun to see how he is going to do in his next steps. So let's just first and foremost start with Hlavaj, who, if Jesper is not going to be in the equation in Iowa, he's going to be your guy down in Iowa. He is going to be the one, I think, that gets the bulk of the starts there, because he represents a really intriguing option that did not previously exist for this Minnesota Wild team. In that, we have played through all these scenarios over the last couple of seasons of, do you keep Filip Gustavsson with Jesper on the way? Now with Marc-Andre Fleury signs to the mix, do you keep Gus? Do you keep Jesper? Do you keep Fleury? Who do you get rid of through all of that? If Filip Gustavsson is traded, I'm not for it, but if Filip Gustavsson is traded and Marc-Andre Fleury retires in the at the end of the season, then all of a sudden you go from having Jesper and Gus to just Jesper Wallstedt. Samuel Hlavaj could be a guy that factors in, over these next couple of years, if his development path is strong and he shows promise at the AHL level. He could be a guy that maybe you look at to be a backup to Jesper in a few seasons. We really won't know until we get a chance to see him settle in against AHL competition, but he has played at a variety of levels. He's played a lot of hockey, and he has been on some not great teams as well. And so we'll see exactly what happens with him. But, you go back to the U18 team for Slovakia back in 2016, 2017. He appeared in 17 playoff games that year and had a 2.56 goals against average and a .923 save percentage. The next year with the U18 Slovakia team, he had a 2.18 goals against average in 14 games in the playoffs. He was at 1.93 and a .952 save percentage. So he's got some good hockey in there. It's just a matter of, does that translate to the AHL level? Now, his likely tandem partner will be another player that was added to the organization this past year, and that is Troy Grosenick. Grosenick has been around for a while. He is 34 years old, from Brookfield, Wisconsin, and has just played in 4 total games at the NHL level. 2 with San Jose, 2 with Los Angeles. He's 2-2 with a 2.27 goals against average and a .933 save percentage. So he's gotten to the NHL level, has had good results with both of the teams, but very clearly as just kind of an emergency, kind of a fill-in player. What he's done in the AHL has been pretty impressive all told. This past season, he spent most of the year with the Milwaukee Admirals. 2.56 goals against average, a .907 save percentage. He was 17-8-2. In the playoffs, he had a 2.66 and a .902 save percentage. You go back to Providence. He had a 2 goals against average back in 2021-2022, a .933 save percentage, 16-6-6, then had a 1.68 and a .939 save percentage that year in the postseason. He has played for Union College from 2010-2011 to 2012-2013, then went to Worcester, then the San Jose Barracuda, then the Milwaukee Admirals, then the Los Angeles Kings and the Ontario Reign, then the Providence Bruins, then the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, and the Milwaukee Admirals, and now here to the Iowa Wild. This move, to me, was done to just have a, I think, veteran guy in the organization. Is it likely he's going to factor into the equation really at all at the NHL level? No. But he is somebody that I think can provide a little bit more of a steady presence than Zane McIntyre did this past year. McIntyre went something like 3-14. And so it just made sense for just a change in the organization as to how the goalie situation has played out. And so in my estimation, Hlavaj and Grosenick are going to be your two main goalies for the Iowa Wild this upcoming season. But there are still a couple of intriguing players in the organization to keep an eye on, including the goalie of the year last year in college hockey. We'll talk about those names, and we'll also talk about where the Athletic put the Minnesota Wild in terms of goalie tandem rankings this year. Today is the goalie show. It is the organizational depth chart for the Minnesota Wild at the goalie position. We'll continue today's show after this here on Locked on Wild. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, you know me. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want any of my favorite teams to stop playing. With the playoffs in the rearview mirror, we have fewer games, and sports just aren't sportsing the way we would like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I am in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Recorded both crossover episodes with Ann Kimmel of Locked on Predators and Joey Erickson of Locked on Stars. Locked on Stars for you tomorrow, and then we'll hear from Locked on Predators on Monday. A phenomenal conversation with both shows. The Locked on Predators one was just great because we talked some Yakov Trenin, talked about Gustav Nyquist, and got the inside scoop as to what happens to cause Barry Trotz to cancel the U2 concert, and then the team went on just that insane run. We got the inside intel on that, so that's coming up for you on Monday. But I want to direct your attention to Locked on Senators, because Locked on Senators today had Brady Tkachuk on as a guest, the captain. It was a phenomenal interview. I listened to it twice. You're going to want to make sure to tune into it as well. So for your second listen today, make sure you head over to Locked on Senators. All right, back to the task at hand, the organizational depth chart for the Minnesota Wild. We laid out Hlavaj and Grosenick, who I believe will be your Iowa Wild goalie tandem. Jesper could factor into that, but we're kind of pushing him off to the side because the hope is to get him to the NHL level before all is said and done. I want to direct your attention to a couple of names because Puckpedia lays out the entire organizational depth chart. And on the reserve non-roster list is Chase Wallstedt. Wallstedt is 17. He is 6'2", 161 pounds. And you look at his body of work from Canada. This past season with the Red Deer Rebels in the WHL, 19-10-2 with a 2.82 goals against average and a 904 save percentage. He also, in 7 playoff games, was 4-2-1, a 924 save percentage, and a 2.48 goals against average. He has played for the Martinsville Marauders in the SAAHL, Red Deer, and Saskatoon throughout the course of his early hockey career. But a young kid, and this I think is going to be more of a stash and develop. So not somebody that necessarily factors into the AHL or the ECHL this season. It looks like, in fact, Elite Prospects has him going back to the Red Deer Rebels for the 24-25 season. But I want to read what Elite Prospects has to say about Wallstedt, who was drafted in the 5th round by the Minnesota Wild in this most recent draft. The thing that jumps out about Wallstedt is how mobile he is while down in the butterfly. His edge work is strong, and he is adept at keeping himself in the frame of the net. This is bolstered by the fact that he doesn't have an overly aggressive mindset and rarely makes movements that result in him being out of position. And the fact that he's 6'2", 161 pounds at 17 years old, there's some room to grow on that frame. And so not only is this an intriguing name to just keep an eye on, because for those that watched our draft coverage leading up to the NHL draft, thought that it wasn't a bad idea to take a goalie in this draft and just stash him and let him develop for later. And the Wild certainly did that. So we will see what happens with Wallstedt, but I'm intrigued by him. The name that I teased as the one that I am intrigued by quite a bit is Kyle McClellan, who is a senior for the University of Wisconsin men's hockey team, 6'1", 185. And he was one of the best goalies in the NHL or in college hockey this past season. Let me just read his bio for you. He was the Mike Richter Award winner as the nation's top goaltender, a top 10 Hobey Baker Memorial Award finalist, Big Ten Goaltender of the Year, second team West All-American, Big Ten Player of the Year finalist, first team All Big Ten, first team All CHN, sits among the nation's leaders in all major goaltending statistical categories, leads with a .931 save percentage and 7 shutouts, ranks second in the country with a 1.94 goals against average, and fourth with 24 victories. 7 shutouts, ranks second on Wisconsin's single season list. Hockey Commissioner Association's National Goaltender of the Month for December. Quick Trip Holiday Faceoff Most Outstanding Goaltender with consecutive shutouts to lead Wisconsin to the title. 5 Big Ten Stars of the Week. Opened the season with consecutive shutouts against Augustana. The first time in Wisconsin history a goaltender blanked the same team in consecutive games. 7 shutouts are one shy of the Wisconsin record, held by longtime NHL goaltender and 2006 Hobey Baker finalist Brian Elliott. Posted an 8-game win streak from December 1st to January 12th, and a 6-game win streak from October 20th to November 4th. The 6-game winning streak included 2 road wins, each at Michigan Tech and then number 1 Minnesota, as well as a pair of home wins over Michigan. He allowed 2 goals or less in 26 of 34 games played, second among current NCAA goaltenders with a .926 save percentage, and was named All-Academic Big Ten. His stats all told from the 2023-2024 season are pretty impressive. In 37 games, he was 24-12-1 with a 1.94 goals against average and a .953 save percentage. And 7 shutouts as we keyed in on. Just unreal stuff. But he is a player that is going to factor into this from an organizational depth chart at some point. Now, I don't know if he would go to Iowa or back to Wisconsin. So that'll be a question that'll be interesting to see, depending on what his plans are going forward. But adding a player like this to the Minnesota Wild organizational depth chart is, and actually, he was a senior in 2023-2024, so that answers the question right there. So he will be another player, I think, that'll factor in at Iowa as things unfold. And so Chase Wallstedt, Kyle McClellan, a name to keep an eye on here as the season unfolds, because, again, you went from really having question marks behind Jesper Wallstedt as to who is going to be next in Iowa. Now it seems like we are in position to get some answers to those questions. But how does the national media view the Minnesota Wild goalie situation right now? We'll dive into that as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. One final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, if you missed it, you can head over to the Locked on Wild YouTube channel and click on the live tab to check out our latest Sunday live stream with Denny. Show went great. Had a lot of good listener questions in the back half of the show, and so it was definitely, the show just continues to grow on Sundays, and very excited to just continue to further that here. Keep in mind, it is the absolute lull point in the off season, and we are continuing to bring those to you on Sundays. So make sure to check that out if you have not already, and we look forward to you joining us this upcoming Sunday as well. Literally perfect timing in getting ready for this show on the organizational depth chart for the Minnesota Wild at the goalie position, and The Athletic drops an article that says, and I quote, ranking each NHL team's current and future goaltending outlook. And this is part 2, the mushy middle. So we already have had a part 1 to this, which is the bottom 10. And the rankings go like this. Columbus was 32, San Jose 31, Pittsburgh 30, Seattle 29, Los Angeles 28, Chicago 27, Philly 26, Toronto 25, Washington 24, Carolina 23. And I'll give you a hint. A lot of those teams, not great in the futures department either, which is, it's nice to have a future player that you're excited to see develop and really just take the reins, because some of these teams, they've been fighting the goalie position for years and still don't have a solid plan. So we get to the mushy middle. Number 22 on the list is the New York Islanders, who are currently ranked 8th in the NHL. Ilya Sorokin and Semyon Varlamov making up that combo. Future is not great for them, and the cap situation is not super good for the Islanders either. The Minnesota Wild check in at number 21, and so I want to read the blurbs about where they're at out of the 32 teams, and this is by Scott Wheeler, Jesse Granger, and Sean McIndoe. Let's hear about where the Minnesota Wild are at in their process. Number 21 on the list. Their current goaltending ranks 29th out of 32 teams. And here's what Mr. Granger has to say. Jesse Granger has to say about that. With a negative 16.72 goals saved above expected last season, the duo of Filip Gustavsson and Marc-Andre Fleury finished second to last in the NHL. Gustafsson's surprising form from 2022-2023 completely evaporated, and at 39, Fleury is no longer the goalie he once was. The question for the immediate future is, how soon will top prospect Jesper Wallstedt be ready to take over the NHL job? He's only 21, but if he makes his mark on the NHL this season, the Wild have the potential to soar up the list. And so that's current, 29th out of 32. Future, the Minnesota Wild are 4th on the list. And Scott Wheeler has this to say. The Wild's future ranking is driven by Wallstedt, who has a case as the top goalie prospect in the game right now and possesses starter upside. Samuel Hlavaj looks like organizational depth personally, but I'm looking forward to watching him in the AHL, ECHL next season. And Chase Wutsky is a decent WHL goalie and a fine 5th-round pick. Wallstedt could be the difference maker here, though. And then we finish with the cap situation. Sean McIndoe has this to say. The Wild rank in the cap situation, the amount of money you're throwing into the goalie position and the return that you're getting. 18th out of 32. McIndoe says this. Fleury is on his last legs, but his $2.5 million deal isn't awful and has just 1 year left, while Gustafsson has 2 years and $3.75 million per, which seemed like value last year and no longer does. The good news for Bill Guerin is that the future looks bright, and the dockets will be cleared by then. And the bottom line, they say this pretty succinctly: no pressure, Jesper. But it is comforting that, we talked about just never really knowing who was going to be that next guy. Like the Wild obviously lucked into getting Devin Dubnyk and having him be really, really, really good for a couple of seasons. They had Nicholas Backstrom before that. And so the Wild have found players to be able to just, kind of fill that spot and fill it as you go. But it's been a while since the Wild have ever had a true draft and develop goalie that has had this high of a ceiling. And it may, in fact, be the first time the Minnesota Wild have had a draft and develop goalie that has had this high of a ceiling that is no question going to be the number one guy. He's going to come in. It's his job. It's his job to take over, essentially. And so I really don't have any objection to any of these rankings, because I think we are seeing we're seeing this interesting kind of tug of war between where this team is at right now and where they want to get to. Is, Jesper has a path to the NHL level, and beyond this season, it's his job. It is his job to lose. But him getting opportunities this year is dependent on what happens in front of him. That is the perfect metaphor and kind of rallying cry for what's going on with this team throughout the NHL roster, and with the prospects that we want to get an opportunity to succeed. So goalie-wise, what a difference a year makes, because last year in the AHL level, it was Jesper or bust. And now all of a sudden you've got guys that fill out the organization. You've got an intriguing prospect in Samuel Hlavaj. You got a guy in Kyle McClellan who I'm really excited to see what he does after just a dominant Wisconsin season. And so I look forward to seeing how this all plays out and how things look when the dust settles, when it's all said and done, because we've got a little bit of time. We got a few weeks until we are getting set for training camp and the start of next season. But organizationally, let me just hash it out for you as we draw today's episode to a close. Assuming that Jesper factors in at the NHL level, Samuel Hlavaj and Troy Grosenick, I believe, are going to be your AHL combination for the Minnesota Wild this year. Chase Wutzke, he'll head back to the WHL. Kyle McClellan will factor into that mix as well. And so you go from having a situation in which you had Zane McIntyre, who just, it felt like kind of, he wasn't put in the greatest of situations, but it also felt like he kind of reached the end of his tenure here with the Iowa Wild pretty quickly. And now, depending on what happens at the NHL level, there are certainly some options for how to handle the situation, basically on both rosters. And from an organizational standpoint, the depth is the key, and I feel like the depth at the goalie position is good for the Minnesota Wild here this season. So what that looks like when things play out in camp, stay tuned, and we will certainly find out. But that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, we appreciate everybody tuning in each and every day. Even through the offseason here, we continue to get you closer to the start of the season. And hopefully now you have a little better idea as to who is in the system for the Minnesota Wild that could potentially step between the pipes. A reminder, we've got Locked On Stars for you tomorrow, the crossover that I recorded with Joey Erickson. We'll also take a look at the defense organizational depth chart for the Minnesota Wilds. A lot of names. This is going to be probably the most popular one because we are very curious as to how a lot of these guys are going to perform this season. So stay tuned for that coming up tomorrow. And make sure to hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to follow us on your favorite audio platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.